Hi, everyone. Welcome to Office Hours. If you are watching on YouTube, you can find out more about us at officehours.global. Our first hour is general discussion about media and virtual production. The second hour is usually something we want to spend a little bit more time on. Today, we're going to talk about hosting and how we approach it and problems that we have as hosts. And many of us host our own shows here and there, and we'll talk a little bit about that. We'll talk about this as well. And then on tomorrow, we're going to talk more about Office Hours 2.0. We're going to talk about second hours and other things that we just brainstorming in general of what we'd like to see. We won't get to all of it at once, but we're about to make a big shift next week, so we'll have some more discussion there. Saturday is the long day. We'll have education at 9 o'clock, or 8 o'clock, sorry. That doesn't get broadcasted, so you'll need to be on Zoom to do that. And then at noon, we're actually going back to Belfast. So we had a couple shifts, and so we'll be going back to Belfast at noon. That has its own event, and that event goes out in the emails. Also, a reminder that we're looking at starting to do some embedded programming and development as one of our labs. And we put out in the email that you get every day at the very top, there's a questionnaire to say if you're interested in actually participating. That's something that we just need to know how many to prepare for. So definitely check that out in your email. All right, let's jump into the questions. Courtney?
Okay, starting us off this morning is Vincent Alvarez from Bellingham. It says, I've been tasked with creating an inventory for our desktops and laptops, approximately 80 items. Purpose is for theft recovery and assessment of age and ability. With no budget, shall I use a spreadsheet or a table page for each device, or is there freeware?
Go ahead, John.
Good question. Thank you, Vincent, for the question. My dog is happy to answer. I would recommend Google Sheets. It's free, and the nice thing about it is you can have multiple people view or edit these sheets. There's another product called Airtable, which is pretty good as well. Thank you.
Go ahead, Rupert.
So I've used dozens of inventory management systems over the years. They all have their pros and cons. You can start off with a spreadsheet. That'll get you going. Something like Google Sheets will help you keep that under version control, and it'll give you history and stuff like that. But there's a pretty good open source platform out there called Snipe IT, SNIPEIT. Open source, you can install it. It's web-based. Does all your tracking. You can do history and assignments and all stuff like that. And I just recommend that you get some barcode stickers off Amazon, or print your own and then use a barcode scanner, and then you'll be off to the races.
Jeffrey?
Another one that I've used, I actually was on the beta team for this. It's called Spiceworks, and it's been around since 2006, I believe. So basically, they have a whole ton of free tools that you can get to not only catalog your inventory, but also create tickets. So you have a ticketing system. You can also, if you put it behind a domain, you can then do all your collection from that, so it can actually query on the computer and find out if there's any problems, and it'll come back to you, and a lot more. I haven't used it in a while, so there might be some more features to it, but it's all free there.
One of the challenges that we've had in general is ease of use. So, it has to be easy for everyone using it, or they just don't use it. I know we built a FileMaker document for a while, and we actually tied it into a QR code. So we'd print QR codes and put them on there, so you could scan it, and it would tell you when it was bought and what shelf it should sit on, which we could always keep defining, because we used to define it in the back end, and it would tell you what to do. It also, if you scanned them on the way out, it'd tell you what's in every case as it leaves. So it was a relatively useful system. The problem we really had was the scanner itself just wasn't as stable as we'd like it to be. We went cheap, and we didn't get it working, and then no one, people just stopped using it because so we saved, I think, $300 on that scanner, and we lost the whole system over it. So it's just always something to think about when you're thinking about budget, is that you actually have to have people. If you're the only one doing it and you're willing to do it, that's fine. But you really want to think about, some of these professional, tools will cost more, but there's always a balance of cost, physical, cash cost and time cost. All right, next question.
This one comes in from David Paskin in Miami, Florida. It says, doing my first remote production gig, how do you handle managing the receiving of media, assets, etc. for the show? I'm getting lots of emails with attachments and struggling to keep up.
Go ahead, Chris.
There's two parts to this, David. There's the receiving the media beforehand and the managing of media when you're done, sometimes delivering files. It is a struggle. I have dreams in my head. I've designed the whole thing. I just have to have somebody build it for me, of a tool that would make it much easier for multiple producers or stakeholders to share media into a central location. But you're probably going to struggle with a bunch of emails and attachments and just have to keep up on it. Good thing to do is to send, emails back to people, say, I've got your 3 slides, or I have your lower third, thank you. And then they'll help, reminding you, hey, I didn't hear from you. It's hard.
David?
Yeah, in our workflows at work, we use a product called Sony C, which is very similar to Frame.io. It enables you to set up a destination cloud, ask for a media request, send them the link, Aspera accelerated, and drop things right into the folders that you want. Both platforms offer a free trial thing. Frame.io is like a 2 gig cap. Sony's got a 5 gig cap. So if it's a small event, it might be something that's worth checking out. And then education to the users.
You can send an invite from a folder? Is that
Yeah,
right?
they have in Sony C, they have a thing called the media request. So you go in, you create your folder. From there, there's a caret, you drop down, says send a media request. It generates a unique URL, password protected. You can alert people as to when things are arriving. It's really pretty slick.
Whoa. Sorry, I'm not familiar with it. It's been a huge problem for us, is that, dealing with specifically with where to upload. I use Frame a lot, but the biggest problem I have is with Frame is that it doesn't have a solution that allows me to just send someone a link. I'm happy with one folder, let alone the fact that I could send clients different invites from different folders and have them just upload it.
Yep.
What?
And C also has some other.
What's the URL? What's the
SonyMCS.com.
Okay.
/ pricing. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Good stuff.
That is amazing. Vienna.
As much as I'm an Apple person, I think everyone's go-to when they start out is Google Drive. It's just very user-friendly. Most people are familiar with it. It's not too steep of a learning curve, and you can create you don't just put files on, but you can use documents and spreadsheets. And the spreadsheet is good for managing workflow. So for example, if you've got lots of people uploading to the Google Drive, then they can put a link to the file. So when someone clicks on it, then it takes them to that file. So it's kind of like a big directory. So Google Drive would be probably the most user-friendly. The other thing is when people send you emails, if they are sending it to you and you have a Gmail workspace, then it will automatically appear as a file where you can add that to your Google Drive from your inbox.
That's great. Courtney?
She stole my suggestion. Yes, I agree. Google Drive is good. And you get a few gigabytes for free. Everyone does. And who signs up for a Gmail account. And I would go ahead and invest in the first tier is 100 gigabytes for a year. And I think it's quite reasonably priced. I can't remember what it is, but just a few dollars a year.
I think the thing that I always have trouble with Google is that you accidentally get into permissions errors all the time. You have to sign in, and then you have to request access, and then you have to do a bunch of stuff, and that's been my the bane of some of my existence. Go ahead, Marty.
Yeah, what Vienna said. Google Drive, where you can create categorized folders, and you can give different permissions to different people for different folders. And then you can create a spreadsheet with links so that you can do your rundown and other notes and have links to the Drive data, the content.
And Rupert.
Yeah, so much along the same lines as Google Drive. I mean, OneDrive does, if you happen to be anywhere near the Microsoft ecosystem, OneDrive does a pretty similar job. It also integrates, again, if you're in the Microsoft system, it also integrates quite nicely with SharePoint in Office 365. And with a SharePoint site, you can assign an email address to that site. So if you have users that specifically want to still email things, they can email it straight into your SharePoint, which is kind of nice. Permissions is a good thing. Even when you get those set up, remember at the end of the project to go in and clear those out. You don't want those laying around.
Go ahead, Stuart.
When we look at the history of celebrity hacks, Google, Apple, Adobe and Microsoft are the first targets because they're the biggest. And frankly, the security on a lot of them is not as good as it should be. Personally, I prefer mega.nz because its security is better, even if it doesn't have as many of the features.
While we were talking, I'm afraid I signed up for the Sony MCS. I was like, I was like, what?
There's no doubt in my mind.
Yeah. So anyway, so for those of us who do a lot of content back and forth, we were just like, what? All right, I already have the Google Docs and Dropbox and Frame.io. So this is just adding to the collection of places that I have to look every time I try to find a file. Next question.
I'll be happy to show some things if need be.
There's a second hour coming. If someone can put that in the second hour suggestions, that's something that, just put it in there so I remember it. Next question.
Somebody's hitting done again. All right. Douglas Carmichael says, at TWiT Studio, a single TD, John Slanina, controls lighting, video, graphics, audio. And there is a camera, so he can be on the show. Wouldn't it be too much for one person? And isn't it best to have a crew be invisible? For example, wear show blacks.
Go ahead, Jason.
Alex is going to be better at this one than me, but I think that just the big secret is he's incredibly talented. He's incredibly well practiced, and he does his job very, very well. So he doesn't interject a lot, but the camera's there just in case he wants to. It's long and the short of it.
Go ahead, Aaron.
The shows are designed to be run by one person, so I think a lot of the infrastructure, a lot of the people involved have designed everything so that one person can run all of it. So, and it's obvious that he's very talented and good at his job, but he's done it for a long time too. So I think if you design for the right thing, if that's your use case, then you'll make it work.
Also, that you always have to remember that TWiT is a record primary event, so the live has a fair bit of, like, if it starts on time or if we need a little more time to work on something, we have it. If there's something wrong in the middle of the show, we stop and we do it. The live experience for the people who are watching the live is part of, it's like a behind the scenes, not really a show, and so how you approach that is completely different. Because you don't have the same level of having to hit things, because 95 to 99% of the people who end up taking in the show take it in post, and generally I think 90% are audio. so it's a different level of pressure, as Aaron said, and John is very talented and knows the system backwards and forward, as Jason said. But I think that the big thing is it is designed for that. There's a lot of room for error. And we have errors, like it's just that, when we're on the show, if I'm on enough to see them, but it's not critical because it's just part of the live experience. I think I love that about TWiT, is that there's just kind of loose live experience that if you join, you're going to see something that you didn't see in the show that you downloaded for your podcast, or hear something you didn't hear. It's just part of, and there's all kinds of conversations that happen before the show and after the show. And, there's just a lot there that's available. So I like the fact that it's a different kind of content than what you get on the podcast. Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, that's right. They can't edit out stuff because they run everything through editorial before they post the pre-records the recorded version of the show.
Right.
And John uses that camera primarily, I think, to do PL connections to people, getting them set up and bringing them in off camera and off the stream that you don't see, so that he can work out problems with people, without having to do it on the stream.
Yeah, absolutely. Next question.
I hit the button. All right. David Paskin in Miami, Florida. Does Zoom ISO work with a Zoom events program? I only have a link for the Zoom event, not a meeting, ID and password.
Go ahead, Rupert.
This is a good question. What I do know is that Zoom Events requires a very recent version of the Zoom client, and it's not even available on all the all the ways into just the regular Zoom. It's not supported on the web portal just yet. So I don't know. It'd be a worthwhile test, but I know if you look at the prerequisites, it's very specific.
Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, I'd have to say, just to follow up on Zoom Events testing, we had Josh Kaufman, who was on the panel, that volunteered the last time that we brought up this. I had an extended events license to be able to test out and up until like midnight last night. So I fell asleep as these guys were still testing, and they're in New York and I'm in Pacific time. So they were, to me, it was 10 o'clock and there, it must have been 1 a.m. So they were still going at it. And what it looks like to me is that you have to use the login because it's a heavyweight registration page. So if you do not use that login, you cannot get past the barrier. Like that's a big security fence. It will not let you have to log in with the Zoom client with that name. So once you're in the meeting, if you're using Zoom ISO, I'm sure that you can suck those in because it's just a wrapper. So it's still the underlying client. It's just you got to get past security first.
Yeah, I don't think it has a passcode though. When you get into a session in Zoom events, you go to like the security whatever. There's like it's a secure meeting, but the passcode isn't exposed.
David?
What we saw last night, though, was there is the co-host capability similar to webinars here. So if you could grant co-host to if you could grant co-host to an authorized Zoom ISO account, that might do it. I'm not sure.
Next question.
This one comes in from Douglas Carmichael. It says, in the concert where NASA connected to the ISS live, John Mayer at the Houston Livestock Show, would the audio have gone through the artist's console? I couldn't see a major artist happy about changing their show file and I/O patch on short notice.
Go ahead, Aaron.
You do what you do to make it work. And if the ISS gets to come into your show, then you do whatever it is to make that happen, because it's a pretty rare and unique experience. So yeah,
I've done some events with the ISS, so that it's not that complicated, and you don't use the musicians or the show mixer. So you do a downstream from that. So you're taking the outputs from the show and then building the mix minus. So the way it comes down from ISS is it's a satellite, obviously a satellite drop into Houston. The fact that it's in the Houston Livestock Show is convenient, but it doesn't really matter. We can put it anywhere. There's a fiber, there's IP and then fiber out of Houston, and then they can also push it back to a satellite. So the problem with it going up to the satellite again is that you bounce it twice. So you're getting the delay from the ISS to Houston, then you put it up on a satellite. So you're adding 2 more bounces to that process. That's why the astronauts are really good at nodding. You'll notice that they're really good at nodding because there's that delay. Now, if you get it direct, which hopefully they did here, then they can get the audio, at least the audio transport, if not the whole video transport. And especially in Houston, it would be much easier for them to get a more direct route. So they, but that will typically be managed by a mixer that is not the musician's mixer. So the musician stays with the same format, and that way you can manage it, because you have to manage the other problem you have is that when you do it, there's a series of interactions that you have with Houston and with the ISS that are very scripted and very specific and have to be followed to the word. So they're, and you're not during the show. Like there's a bunch of stuff that happens before the shows. It's cool. We've used it in the show because it's so cool. But in general, there's a protocol to define connection between the two sites. So that Houston will say, they'll say, Livestock Show, can you hear us? And they'll say, yes, we can hear you. Houston, they'll say Space Station, can you hear us? And they'll say, yes, we can hear you, Houston. And then Space Station, can you hear? They'll do this kind of protocol that is very specific. That's the part that doesn't usually end up in the show. Usually what happens is that all gets done. Now we're all back and forth, and then we're dropping into the show. And the problem really is that what does get defined by Houston is the time, because there's only certain windows that they can do it in. And then there's a schedule that you're working inside of. There's lots of other things that the astronauts have to do, and lots of other places that they have to talk to in their window. So it's a complex thing, but from the audio engineering perspective, it's not that hard. And the musicians engineer probably would just be sending program out, sending the mics out, not even program, just the mics that would return. In fact, you want to be careful of what you send, because you want to make sure it's perfectly clear as it goes through. So you're oftentimes making sure that it's a SM58 or something that's going to get rid of all of that. Anyway, next question.
Does John Mayer ever go, Houston, we have a problem?
I don't. that we said that once, and it's just not that funny. Like to them, it's not like somehow it's like it's funny to us, but to them it's they might have heard it once or twice before. So I think that's the challenge. Anyway, next question.
Coming in next from Aaron Husledge in Durham, North Carolina. It says, any thoughts on Tony's show last night on Conversations with Tony Mobley?
Go ahead, David.
Yeah, I'll admit, when I first heard of the concept of Conversations with Tony Mobley, last night is what I pictured in my mind, that classic Charlie Rose style, two-person having a conversation. And I'm glad you hit your stride with it, and it was awesome.
Yeah, that's great. Guy?
Yeah, I was going to remark the same thing. It's great to see Tony falling in line as a good host. I mean, there's lots of tech going on behind the scenes, but the bottom line is that we're here to do a conversation, and Tony really hit it out of the park on that one. He was totally genuine. He was in his zone. He wasn't having to worry about the questions. You can just tell that he was focused. Now, if you do want to hear but some of the behind the scenes, I mean, it's looking better. The guest did have a little bit of some internet hiccups. There was some crumbling, just bandwidth. I think he was on Wi-Fi. Aaron's getting more comfortable cutting the show. Manolo's getting more comfortable. Just the dialogue and the comms is getting better. In after hours, we're starting to see just some relaxation when the show comes on. This time the comms were audible. The show we can hear it in, so we can talk and discuss. So it's nice to have that audio and feel that calm instead of when there's 9 panelists and it's a little more chaotic. There's just a lot going on, and we could really use some more help. So make sure to fill out that volunteer form on the Conversations with Tony Mobley website.
I think that there's gonna be a point where we go, remember when Tony was just in our little office hours? We were just we knew Tony, we knew him, he hung out with us. I think that the interviews are getting really good. Next question.
Coming in from Douglas. Hitting the button. Douglas Carmichael. Apple is now planning to have employees return to the office for 3 days per week starting in January. In light of the remote first trend that's been steadily increasing in the tech sector, do you think this is a step forward or backwards?
Go ahead, Charles.
I don't see it as a step forward or backward. I see it as society trying to find a happy medium. I think for Apple, it's difficult. There are some people that need to deal with things face to face. Like, for example, my fiance, because she is in textiles and fashion and interior design, and you can't touch a fabric on Zoom, right? So there are some people that will have to be there to make the decisions. But I think we've learned there are many jobs that can actually be done remotely. And Apple, like every other big company, is trying to find that happy medium, and I'm sure they will.
Rupert?
So these kind of stories are interesting. Companies opening their offices. Some of those may be doing that on an optional basis, or some may be doing it on a mandatory basis. But either way, I look at some of these stories through the same kind of glasses I do hybrid events. Well, hybrid, I often just read transitionary. We're trying to figure this out. We're going to do some things and see what sticks. And when it comes to the tech industry specifically, I mean, over the last couple of years here, people will have accepted positions on a remote basis. So talk about bringing people back to the office. Some of these newer employees now will have been hired as remote employees, possibly vast distances away. You can't necessarily just bring them into the office.
Absolutely. Vienna?
I also agree with Charles in that it's not necessarily a forward or a backward step. I like to say it's a step to the side, in that it's a little bit different. Different would be the word that I'm using. And I think there's been quite a lot of backlash from employees, not so much because they're going back to work, but because it was such a sudden announcement, because people don't like to be destabilized. They have might have made arrangements with their family, they might have made arrangements at home. And so to have an announcement like that and have to prepare within a short amount of time to go back to work is probably part of the thing that makes it feel backward. But again, it is to do with adjusting and transitioning.
Go ahead, Aaron.
I agree with that. I know that I've had friends that have left Apple because of this. And I know that there are lots of people leaving Apple because of this. I don't think that'll change anything, but it's an interesting data point.
David?
There are certain teams or what have you that might benefit from that in-person type thing. So that's one on the 4. And to everybody else's point, that sudden shift 18 months ago to work from home and it was that uncertainty, and now they're trying to figure it out to go back is concerning. But I have to go to the office later today, so.
I think that one of the most forward-thinking companies in this area has been Dropbox, where they just basically said, we're going to turn our whole offices into basically a WeWork. And so if you want to come in and get free food and have great internet and have meetings and work with teams, there are rooms available for you to do it. If you want to do it at home, you can do it at home. Like there's not any, and so if you want to get out of the house, like because it's crazy or it's small or the internet's bad or whatever it is, you can do that, but you don't have to do that. You can choose how you want it, and you can have it be one day and then not another day. And so I think that they have kind of where we're probably going to go for a lot of folks. I think the problem really is that people suddenly got a taste of, they really up until a year and a half ago were either unemployed and hanging out and having it at home, but always having the stress of eventually I'm going to run out of money. And then the second side of that was they were always working and going to an office and everything else. This thing that broke that up was they were now getting stuff done and realizing I'm getting as much stuff done as I was before, but I'm doing it at home. And then they figured it all out. They figured out when they could go to do the laundry and when they could do this, and they can be running this, and they can make lunch at home, and they can go pick up their kids but work until 8, or they can do whatever those things look like that made it work for them. And I think that a big problem that companies have is the resistance of giving that up, because it's the life, right? Like if you can get that life where it's flexible and you can just kind of have it work, rather than having, there's only one time first thing in the morning I have to go and do my take my dry cleaning in, do I need dry cleaning anymore, right? Like that's like a lot of us have gotten used to that. And I think that there was a crush of, what to wear and how to get there and how to, do all those things. And just the other thing is just the being stuck in an office in the afternoon after lunch. It's hard. Anyway, so anyway, I think that I think people really I think that's a big piece of the puzzle. Go ahead, Piana.
You reminded me of something, and that's that there are always going to be people who complain about going to work, and there's always going to be people who complain about Zoom fatigue. You're never going to keep everybody happy. And COVID gave us the illusion of choice, which is you can do this or you can do that. So that made people fatigued and indecisive.
Yeah, and I think that suddenly people realize that for some people they can do both. And I think companies have to accommodate both sides. Some people really want to go into the office and some people really don't. And I think that most of the people that I know that are working, not necessarily at Apple, but at other information companies, are like, if they make me go back, I'm not going to quit, but I'm going to start checking LinkedIn all the time. Like they're like literally, they just immediately will start. If they have to go back 5 days a week, they're all like, I'm there until I find a better job. Like, and these are people that have been at the companies they've been at for 5 or 10 years, and they're just, and they thought that they were going to retire there. I mean, because they're dug in, they're senior, and a lot of the companies have, backed off. They've gone, hey, we're going to do this, and then they backed off because they can't afford to lose that many of their core staff. Go ahead, Stuart.
Yeah. Large companies also have an inertia about how they react to different things. A lot of them are tied into 5 and 10-year leases for office space. They will be wanting people in there to use it. Someone like Apple or Google and whatever, you might just look at the office space and say, hey, more space for servers, and just start filling up the offices with other things. But they've got that inertia, and there's a lot of companies facing exactly the same issue. Big companies react slow. They've had a shock that's caused market stalling in stocks and shares and all sorts of things. And they want to go back to the way they were because that's how they knew the world ran. The world doesn't run like that anymore.
Right. And the other thing is that the open office was a disaster. Like the open office concept was a complete and utter disaster, possibly the biggest drag on productivity in the history of the world. Because it is such a distraction. Like everyone that I worked with, and I got, I'd sit in some offices that were open office. I don't even know how anybody gets anything done. Like it is annihilating, and so part of the resistance is not just if people had their own little office the way they used to, you would have less resistance. It's that they don't want to go back to that shared space, when they had their own space, again. Go ahead, Rupert.
I think that one of the things that's going to really define this long term is attracting and retaining talent. That I think is going to be a big part of this. If companies can't do that, then they're going to find ways to do it. And if you look at the responsibilities that HR departments are given these days, how do we develop company culture? How do we do all these things and make this a nice place to work? And how do we make equality so everybody's having the same level of experience? Those kinds of things are going to drive some of these solutions ultimately.
Yeah. Go ahead, Courtney.
So now Apple can lease out a third of that big round spaceship building to WeWork.
Yeah, I don't think that they have. Most of these companies are vastly oversubscribed for the number of people that they have available for the offices. I think that they're just trying to figure out how do you maintain a cohesive culture, and I think that's part that they haven't quite figured out yet. Next question.
Coming in from Hasmukh Gaijar in Cape Town, says on Saturday's cooking show, the video feed stalled. He concluded that it was the internet connection. The local South Africa server's speed.net test is 380 down, 180 up. However, changing to New York servers, speed.net was 30 down, 15 up. Zoom attendee performance depends on Zoom server host, ? What is the fix?
Go ahead, Rupert.
We talked about this a little bit yesterday, but it is true that a Zoom meeting or event or webinar or whatever is natively hosted in the region that Zoom account was provisioned in. So a US native account, that meeting will originate in the US. Now you can enable other data center regions in Zoom for your transit data, and that maybe will help to some extent, but not everybody wants to do that. But ultimately, it's not specifically a Zoom problem. But if your ISP or a network that they are using for transit, if between there and Zoom's network or the network that they are using for transit, if there's a bottleneck there somewhere, then ultimately sometimes the solution is just to go with a different ISP who has better peering arrangements over the route that you need to use.
Jeffrey?
Yeah, we did a test on this a couple weeks ago with the remotes, and Greg was hosting it, and he was in Norway, and we ended up on his reflector in Norway, and it really bogged down. But the second that we moved to the United States, where the majority of people were, that kind of changed the numbers a little bit, and of course, some people saw what is it, like 30 milliseconds or something like that in their Zoom thing. So it doesn't hurt to try a different meeting in a different location, and I would guess going through the United States would be the better thing, especially if the majority of people are in the United States for the meeting.
Next question.
This one comes in from David Paskin in Miami, Florida. Looking for a 24-inch teleprompter and screen that I can put Zoom on. Specific recommendations appreciated.
Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, if you Google search for that one, the most popular item that's going to pop up is the prompter people line, and the prompter people one that we see moving out the door is that 24-inch Pro line. But they also have this one that's worth mentioning that's for the work from home crowd, where you can set it on a desk, and it's got some nice ability with a head there to move it and position it into the spot that you want. So I'd be taking a look at that work from home model in addition to the Pro line if you don't want to put it on a tripod or traditional C-stand.
It's really interesting. I haven't seen that before. Mitchell?
Yeah, the one Guy just showed is the Flex model, and they have another version of that uses an articulated arm, which I think is a little more useful. But I'm sort of in the same boat with you, David. I'm still shopping to decide what I want, but the thing that is differentiated between the range of teleprompters that I've looked at is most teleprompters typically are 4:3 ratio because text wants to run down the center of the screen. That's the easiest way to do it. For Zoom, you really want the full 16:9 image, a 1080 image on there. So the prompter people is the one prompter company, probably the only one I've seen, that puts the 1080 type monitors in their boxes. So the one the guy showed you and the one I'm just suggesting is a 16:9. So you have the width for Zoom calls so that you can spread that real estate out wherever you want to.
Go, Jason.
I'm a huge fan of the desktop FreeFly, the single arm teleprompter. I absolutely love it. And it's worth mentioning, just as an aside, the color fidelity is not going to be spectacular on a teleprompter. Like, that's worth mentioning. So, just I guess I just feel the need to mention that.
You have to correct for everything that you're going to do. So if you're going to run a camera through a teleprompter, what you should do is build a LUT for your camera, a color correction that is going to take into account whatever's in front of that camera. Anytime you change what's in front of the sensor, you need to recolor your camera to take advantage, whether that's a LUT or a correction through the switcher or a correction through the camera. But you have to assume that, I put something in, it doesn't mean it's all going to be the same again. It now needs to be corrected if you're using it live. Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to mention, is there will be a little bit of light loss for exposure on your camera and maybe a slight color shift. But the other important thing, and why you pay big bucks for these, and what I miss about an NAB, is being able to see one in person, because some of these less expensive models don't have very bright monitors. And so what happens is everything looks dull. So like, I swapped out the monitor on mine with a consumer monitor, and so mine's a little bit dull. I really want to get the high bright monitor. I've seen it in person at NAB, and it's so much just richer. Like, everything just pops, because mine's kind of subdued right now.
And the only challenge with that, of course, is that you might see it in the image. So you are putting something in front of the camera. So one of the reasons you have to be careful of things being too bright, because you can see them nice and clearly now, but so can the camera. So that becomes a slight problem. Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, that with the high brightness monitors, especially if you're in a darker room, can be a problem. You can crank the brightness down on those high bright monitors. Most of them have a backlight adjustment so that you can actually bring down the level of the backlight. But yeah, you don't want to get them too high, because in a situation like a Zoom situation, you're pretty close to that teleprompter. You're within a couple of feet. And that light from your screen, if you're not in dark mode, and I suggest you be in dark mode, that light's going to come back in your face and turn you blue.
Next question.
All right, coming in from Rupert McCrae in Dallas, Texas. Did Zoom resolve the audio crushing when users are connected with telephone audio?
Go ahead, Aaron.
There's very little that Zoom can do with that. They can do some expansion and audio processing, but I don't know.
I think that the issue that
connections are all 8 kilohertz audio streams from telcos.
Yeah, I think that the issue, I think what Rupert's talking about, and Rupert, you can correct me if I'm wrong, is the fact that we lost stereo if a phone connected. So instead of handing the phone something specific to it, it just handed. I personally think that they should just hand the left channel to the phone. Here's your left channel. Not try to. I think that it was just, but it summed everything, and so we would lose it. Go ahead, Rupert.
Yeah, so it seems like I saw in maybe after hours in the last couple of days, somebody was testing it, and there was a phone user dialed in, and the audio did seem to be panning, at least successfully left to right. So it seemed like it's been resolved, but I just didn't.
Was someone was on a phone in the meeting?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Interesting. Yes. Okay, maybe they fixed that. Yeah, we'll have to do some more tests. Next question.
Another one coming in from Rupert McCrae in Dallas, Texas. He says, in After Hours yesterday, it was mentioned that some maybe older model big screen TVs have a horizontal flip function hidden deep in the menu. I think Samsung was mentioned. Why would this feature be included on big screen TVs, and what is their use?
Go ahead, Stuart.
Well, this one's a hangover. It's comes back to the days of CRTs. If you needed to hang a TV from a roof with a CRT, it had to be hung upside down because of the way the structure held the tube. So they kept the features when they moved to LCDs and whatever. You don't hang the TV upside down anymore, but the features are still there in the high-end ones simply because they're a carryover from what was there before. Places you'll see them used, pubs, train stations, teleprompters.
Go ahead, Charles.
Actually, I second everything that Stuart just said. Yeah.
Courtney?
Yeah, if you do want to hang them upside down, you can do that, because sometimes they have a bigger bezel at the bottom to accommodate speakers and controls. But a lot of it is just the fact that they use a single chipset in their decoder board, that's in their scaler board, that goes into all their TVs, and it's in there for the smaller TVs that are used they use them in cars and stuff for backup monitors where the image does need to be reversed. So,
Vienna?
Yeah, pretty much any time when the image just needs to be reversed. So using my imagination here, this is a long shot, but if you're watching something in a mirror, or if you're projecting something where it flips it, you have to reflip it, or if the video that you're inputting is flipped, so you need to flip it.
Yeah, and I think that it's one of those things that it was needed somewhere, to Courtney's thing, and they put it in the chip and then they hide it deep because they're like, no one's going to need this, but we have it, so we might as well put it in there because it's someone spent engineering resources on it. It's on the chip. Why not why not give you a bit to flip it? Next question.
Coming in from Don Huber in Erie, where does everyone sell their previous MacBooks? Is Apple the best or another company?
Go ahead, Aaron.
I don't sell my used equipment. I give it away to somebody who needs it. It's the best way I can think of to, unless giving a new one is an option. I would just rather give something away.
Go ahead, John.
So I call my gaggle of my Apple friends for my used stuff, and then I've had really good luck lately on Facebook Marketplace. They've really done a good job there.
Go ahead, Jason.
I typically sell my hardware to my clients, and it tends to go very quickly because it's a rule, it's very well taken care of, and, it's usually around 40% off. So that goes away pretty quickly. If no one's interested in that, then I just give it away. I donate it.
Yeah, go ahead, Charles.
In the house, we had 4 of the 2019 models. I'm going to keep one. My fiance's going to keep one, and I've already sold 2 to friends and one of the techs that I work with that they do work that they need that chip. So usually friends and coworkers.
But I have to admit, I don't sell things to friends because I'm always afraid that it'll come back like, oh, that was broken and there was this thing that I didn't know and everything else. And so I always try to sell it to someone who will just, it is what I said it was going to be. I never have to hear from them again. Yeah, go ahead, Charles.
They know how I maintain my stuff, which is why they trust me. I don't let anybody in my room.
Go ahead, Rupert.
We heard recently, how if you buy new equipment from Apple, it's registered to your account. Then later, if you lose it or get locked, you can go back to them and unlock it, something like that. I wonder whether there's actually a market out there for like original purchaser directory. So if you buy equipment, you can track down maybe the original owner to help you with that. Or if do we know if you buy used equipment, refurbished equipment from Apple, whether they can do that in that instance also?
I think it pretty much acts like a regular. I mean, I think that you're an original purchaser if you buy it from Apple, because they're going to register that back under you and properly manage it. There's a great story, by the way. I don't know where it is, somewhere on the internet, of a guy whose phone was stolen and then it was sold to a restaurant owner in China, and it's a great story. He went to meet him because the new owner didn't turn off the share with iPhotos, so he's getting photos from China like on his shared thing. So he's just seeing all the photos that the new owner was taking, and so he used it to figure out who he was, and then went and visited him, and it became, I guess, big press in China. So by the time he got landed at the airport, he was like a superstar, and so it was a fun thing that. Anyway, it's one of the reasons I don't sell my Apple devices. I just never know exactly how those all get tied back. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
Now I'm wondering what happened to my old stolen iPhone 5.
Yeah.
For me, actually, I'm the reverse to you, Alex, because I want to know who I'm selling it to, because if there is a problem, we can talk right then and there and have that. I was going to try and do the trade-in this time to see how that process works, but the price of the trade-in for my 2017 MacBook Pro wasn't as great as I once saw, and of course I still haven't pulled the trigger on the purchase of the new MacBook Pro yet. So, but yeah, for me, it's I want to give it away to people that need it, and if I do sell it, I want to sell it really close so I know what's going on with it. If there's any problems, I can fix it.
I tried to trade in my watch. I have a version 4, and I bought the 7, and I tried to trade it in. And Apple's so nice about saying, "Hey, it's really not worth anything," but they said it really nicely.
We'll recycle it for you. There's nothing, free.
But we can recycle it. But they were like, "I'm afraid we can't give you anything for this, but we can do it." And it was like I know that there was a lot of meetings about how to say your watch is worthless. Anyway, go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, usually we'll check the completed listings on eBay to see what stuff's going for, and then I'll try to price it a little bit lower just to quickly move it. But the amount that Apple offered me on my i9 top of the line laptop that was $3,500 a year ago was $1,490. I was like, I don't think I'm going to let this one go for that amount. It was almost $4,000 for this laptop. So $1,490 was just a little too little.
Yeah.
So I'm going to go with eBay.
Yeah. Stuart?
Just a note on personal privacy with all of these sorts of e-waste devices. The best solution to protect your privacy is a 14-pound sledgehammer.
Yeah, you can generally, if you write ones and zeros over your hard drive and you're not interesting, you're probably okay. But that's probably enough. But the sledgehammer, we went through a couple thousand drives with a drill press and a sledgehammer as we closed out. So it takes more work than you think. And you think, oh, I'll do that in a day, and then like 2 weeks later, you're like still pounding drives. So anyway, yeah, I have to admit that I run all my computers into the ground. So they're all doing something. I don't know if they're all doing something, but they're all available. Oh, I need a viewer over here. I need something over here. I need one little controller over here. It's one of the reasons I like my Mac Minis so much, is that you can just stick them somewhere and have them working. Next question.
Coming in from Tobias Moss in Minneapolis, he says Pixel 6 just came out on Tuesday. What do you think?
Is anyone excited about it? I don't know. No one knows.
Anyone who has one can't talk about it yet, so
right.
That problem.
Right. There's that. So maybe we have to ask that question in a little bit. See if someone here gets it. I think, I'm glad that they're moving it forward, but it didn't have any features that had me have to go run out and get it. Next question.
Coming in from Anthony Martin in Brooklyn. Starting a new production team in New York City area, what companies are used to insure field gear and studio gear?
Go ahead, Rupert.
I just want to give a shout out to, finding an insurance agent or a broker. You can shop around and find your own thing, and you can maybe save some money, but where does that cost come at a later date? Find a good broker, for good agent, one that's been around for a while and has been around the block and has seen some issues and worked their way through them and helped their clients, then that will pay for itself.
Go ahead, Aaron.
I've used Hiscox and I've used Vouch, and they're both really good.
Courtney?
I don't have any specific suggestions, but look for a broker that handles inland marine, because most equipment is handled through that type of policy for some strange reason. And not every insurance company will handle production gear, because there's a lot of exclusions, and make sure you watch out, because there's a lot of exclusions in those insurance policies, which is why I've finally dropped insurance. If it's like stolen from a vehicle, it's not covered. Yeah, hey, how else is it going to be insured in New York City?
Next question.
Okay, coming in from Anthony Buzzio in Boynton.
Hey, Anthony, by the way. I know Anthony. Go ahead.
Boynton Beach, Florida, says, is there a reliable way to test internet bandwidth? I've always been skeptical of the speed test sites and ISP as a man in the middle.
Go ahead, Jason.
If for broadcasting, your best bet is to figure out which CDN, like do a trace route, figure out where you're going on the internet, and then try to target as specifically close to there as you can. It is absolutely true that there is no connection, no one connection that is the connection to the internet, because of course, a China redirect is going to take a lot longer than, across the street.
You go, Rupert.
So there's no need to be necessarily skeptical of the speed test. You just have to realize what they are. It's testing the connection from your connection to a very specific point that may have nothing to do with, the service that you're going to be wanting to push down that pipe, or the exact network that you're going to terminate on. The only way to do that is to measure the performance from you to that actual service that you really want to use.
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
So, internet speed tests are sometimes a facade for so you can feel good because you see a number. Any type of real test is to test it with oscillations and to see how the frequencies pass through and through the cable. That's kind of tough to do if you're going from your spot to, let's say, California or something like that, but you could definitely test a lot of the stuff inside your home and make sure that your cables, all the cables are working at their peak performance that way before you start to do any types of speed tests.
Go ahead, Charles.
I've been doing my speed test in the terminal. I use speed test CLI. But to use that, you need to install a couple of things in the terminal. But it's been pretty reliable. I don't know if the group has any experience with that service or that thing.
I don't think I do. Aaron?
I've used that before, but if you really want to do a speed test, then you need to, there's a tool called iPerf that you can run on a server where you're going, and you run on a client where you're coming from, and it actually does a real end-to-end test between them. And that's the real way to get performance information that isn't through some mediated party.
Yeah. One of the things that I also just need to know that I also know that there's a limited accuracy. The precision of this is very low. And so what I want is the most conservative estimate. So I tend to use speedtest.net, and we'll check a variety of servers around to many of the points here around where I think it's going in. So if I'm doing a trace route and I know that it's going to go into this city, Brussels or whatever, what's my connection to Brussels? What's my connection to this? But I check a couple different servers, because if a server in speedtest.net is overloaded, you'll get a lower reading. And then you'll think, oh, it doesn't work. But if you check another server, it's way faster because that server is faster. So I take a kind of a range of those. Speedtest.net will show you the lowest numbers and the least of all the ones that we've used in the past, which is why we use it. So we say it has to be what we need in that most conservative space that it provides. And we test it a couple times. We test it often, but that's been the one that as kind of a knee jerk, this is what we use to test. There's a lot of higher end solutions that were mentioned here, but I think that's the one that we've used for the last decade, just as a quick test. And we do Speed of Me, a bunch of other ones as well, but those are, and especially because we have to send it to people and have them just log in and do it to let me know what their connection is. And it gives me a pretty good idea. Next question.
This one comes in from our own Tony Mobley in Noonan, Georgia. Says, for office hours members coming on conversations with Tony Mobley, do you prefer one-on-one or with panel of friends?
Go ahead, Vienna.
I've never been on a panel where it's a special guest with friends. It's either one-on-one conversations or it's a panel on which everybody gets a roughly equal amount of say. So personally, I would like to be on panel with friends because there's lots of good friends here, but also I'd like to see how it works, just for novelty's sake. So but I'm really cool with either.
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
So I got to see a very little bit of last night, and I liked the one-on-one. There was a good connection there. From the previous shows, it definitely has a connection over to the fact of having 6 people just sitting waiting around and listening in the back end where somebody would say, "Hey, this person needs to be addressed," so have Tony do that. With that said, having more than one-on-one is always good for the host, because the host doesn't know everything about the person that's coming on. So to have somebody with some similar experience and subject matter can help with questions and help drive the conversation. The other thing I would suggest is, if you decided to go back to that panel view, kind of bring the panel in halfway through rather than at the beginning. So you have that one-on-one time in the first 15-20 minutes, then bring the panel in to ask the questions and be a part of it. And that'll make the show go a little bit smoother.
Go ahead, Tony.
So the reason I asked the question is because this is something that I'm working around. And so before I even say it, let me say thank you, everyone who has been supporting my conversations from beginning to end. For me, it is a decision that I make guest by guest. And the reason I say that is because there are some people, well, let me say this too. So for me, most of us, I should say all of us on office hours are very smart people. If you're not really smart, you are really curious and you want to know things, you want to share things, you are innovative, you're doing a lot of different things. And so that's not really what conversations is about. Conversations is about who you are. So what I'm trying to do is to get a larger community to see who the special guest is. And so because of that, there are instances where it's more valuable to have more people around the particular special guest. And then there are sometimes when it should just be me and that person. And so that's just kind of the way I'm looking at it. And so it's a case by case basis. And maybe that's not the best way to do it, but that's the way I'm doing it. And I just really wanted to get what you guys thought about it. And so thank you again, everyone, for the support.
Yeah. Aaron?
Like it depends. And I also think that the panels should probably be smaller and more interacting with the guest as well. I don't have a problem with panels. I obviously am fine with it, but I think
panels, especially large panels, are a horrible idea. I would never do that.
Yeah, big panels. Yeah, they're weird. It's like 15 people.
Yeah,
it's really complicated. But I do think that some playing with the format might be helpful, like Jeffrey was talking about.
You know, I think for me, the issue, especially when you're doing it on a shoestring, is that every person you add is another variable that you have to manage. So when you add more people to a panel, you now have a lot more people that you have bad connections or good connections, or there's time frames and there's things and there's super sources that you built when they weren't going to be there, and so there's all kinds of things that not that I've ever been a problem child there. So the case is there's a lot you have to figure out, and I think that the most important thing is that connection with that one person. I do think that the Mukana in the back end makes a big difference in the sense that it allows you to, in that back end, allows you to take those questions. I won't mention who, but there's a very, very popular person that does a lot of nationally syndicated interviews. And I happened to talk with one of their crew, and they mentioned, I was like, how does that person know all those questions about that person every single day? They said, well, it's not her. She doesn't have to do all of the work. Like, there's people who do all the research. She's got a screen in front of her, and there's questions coming in from producers all the time, and that's why we call our viewers producers, is because what they're doing is they're being it is literally from that they are the producers. They're figuring out what to ask. So I'd rather have Mukana and a whole bunch of people watching and asking and voting on questions of what the question is for the next one that's coming in, and have you talking to a person and having that interview, but having the breadth of the viewership asking, really helping you ask questions and backing you up on it. I do think it's interesting for you to do it as a just playing with it. I think that that's eventually where you'll find where you want to do most of yours, in my opinion, after doing a bunch of them. But I'm happy to learn from you and see if you find a better path than I have, because it's that's just my path, and I love it when other people have other paths that are better than mine. Go ahead, Tony.
So there's going to be a show. Obviously, there will be a show next week, and the panel is going to be about 5 people,
right?
And I see, the value in the panels not being large.
Mm-hmm.
But then when you have a person, coming from Nevada, California on,
mm-hmm.
and everybody knows that person and everybody wants to be on the panel, then you have to consider having a large panel.
I did have fun with that. I as a panelist, I enjoyed that as a guest, I enjoyed having the panel on there. So that is to your point. It was fun.
But I do want to say that the Mukana panel last night was a different experience because the questions were being sent to me. I wasn't looking at my notes
mm-hmm.
to read the questions that I had.
Right.
Everything was plugged into the system. It made
right.
a tremendous amount of difference.
Yeah.
Yeah,
absolutely. We're going to go a couple minutes over because we spent so much time on that one. That was kind of a hosting question. So we're going to just go ahead and just cut through a couple more questions. Next question.
All right, from Rupert McCrae in Dallas, Texas. He says, Windows 11 is gaining more ground, but is not yet supported by Zoom. Some users upgrading to Windows 11 seem to be experiencing problems, quite often with audio. Anyone else hearing of problems?
Go ahead, Mitchell.
I always have problems when I'm upgrading Windows with a PCIe card. It just seems that Windows does not want to give control to other devices. I have less problems with USB audio. but Zoom wanting to have some control of the audio, Windows wants to intercede and cause it to have problems. So experimentally, I just have to upgrade drivers and deal with all kinds of noise every time, but there's always going to be some kind of glitch or some kind of problem with another point grade upgrade with Windows.
Yeah, go ahead, Jeffrey.
If you're having problems with audio, how can you be hearing problems? Seriously, though, I actually have Windows 11 on 4 machines now, and the first thing that I do is I test everything on there. If there's any type of audio problems, my guess is it's a third-party audio company that hasn't really updated to Windows 11. I've tested the Realtek drivers, which is in a lot of laptops, a lot of desktops, and those seem to be working without any problem for Zoom. So check your sound card, make sure that it actually is a sound card that is supported in Windows 11, and you should be fine.
Next question.
All right, this one comes in from Aaron Huslingen, Durham, North Carolina. What does the panel think it's like to be a beginner in the new world of virtual production? How can we teach better?
Go ahead, Rupert.
So beginners can come in all different shapes and sizes. You can have, youngsters coming into it as beginners, or more experienced people coming into it wanting to gain a new skill set. But teaching is like anything else. It's a lot like teaching anything else. It's a lot easier to teach the people who show up wanting to learn. I was trained to ask questions. If you've got people asking questions, then they're so easy to teach. They're like sponges. So there's a joint responsibility of what the people teaching can do better, but there's an equal responsibility on the people, the beginners, to want to learn and to ask questions.
Go ahead, Vienna.
I like that you mentioned questions, Rupert, because I like to teach using the Socratic method, and I like to teach by asking questions. I think it helps the other person feel like we're interested in them and that we want to hear about their story and meet them where they're at so that we can bring them along on the journey with us. Me being on office hours, it's exciting and intimidating, and I appreciate all the help that everybody has given me and meeting me where I'm at, and taking the time to help out and genuinely be interested in my story too.
Charles?
I think it's very exciting for anybody that's trying to learn anything new nowadays. The fact that you can reach out and find a community, let's say like office hours, or you can find information on your phone as soon as you have a question, compared to the way that a lot of us learned before. It's an amazing gift to society. And I think for us to teach, I would second what Vienna said. I would actually try to find out what their path has been to get to this point, and then you understand how to move them forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And go ahead, and we're going to cut it off at Guy. Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, it's interesting to see some of the folks that are coming into this space, because if you're tech savvy, folks like Greg Gibson, Chirik Cheetah, Jonas, they never used vMix a year ago. Like, I've been using it for years. I've been cutting. So I have what we would call a legacy fear, like a breaking stuff. These guys come in and they're looking at it from a whole nother perspective. So they're learning, they're like sponges going in, and there's a lot of vMix tutorials that are online. So if you want to learn something like that, vMix is a great place. AWS, they have lots of tutorials. The problem is that a lot of that stuff is just so heavy. There's so much of it. There's just a massive expanse. So getting a chance to, serve, as Alex has said, drink free is the straw. What's that one go?
Free is the straw that drank 1,000 milkshakes.
Yeah, do that. Do some free productions, help Tony, help some of the other folks, and then learn. Just dig in there. And under pressure, again, another Alexism is, what's that one with the adrenaline is the best teacher? Like, get under pressure. I mean, some of the stuff we've blown up, I've seen Aaron, well, not sweat, but I think it's side he's sweating.
When you work out to failure. You tell your body that you can't do it anymore. You have to fail. You have to find places that you can fail. First, you can watch and try to get as much as you can, but you won't know how to do this until you do it, and then you do it to a point where it doesn't work anymore. So that's the key to the operation. Next question.
Coming in from Hasmik Gaijar in Cape Town, South Africa. Noticed that on the Intel MacBook Pro, Zoom OS-C pushes the CPU to the brink at times greater than 90%. On the M1 Mac Mini, it hovers at around 30 to 60%. Does anyone experience these performance issues. If Zoom OSC has the Zoom OSC components, will Zoom ISO have similar behavior?
Go ahead, Aaron.
This comes down to a lot of things, but memory architecture and efficiency of transcoding are the two big ones in this. The memory architecture is vastly different on the M1. You can go read about it. I won't go over it, but all of that really comes down to just a way more efficient experience.
Yeah.
And so your processor won't go crazy.
The M1 is vastly more efficient than the last Mac Mini, so it's going to be a problem. It's going to be better as you move forward. Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, and also notice the difference that between the MacBook Pro and the Mac Mini is the cooling is quite a bit different on those, and there's thermal throttling that can go on that can affect your performance on the laptops.
Let's go ahead to the next question.
This one comes in from Elliot Robinson from Las Vegas. It says, what can CDC and FDA advisory committees do to improve video meetings? Their meetings are technically lacking in comparison to office hours.
Lacking is an understatement. Go ahead, Rupert.
I mean, it might take some time and probably a few different approaches, but I think one thing that might influence this in the medium term is going to be the accessibility type of thing. If these people are coming on with bad audio, bad video, is that making it difficult for certain sets of users to get in and be able to either participate or just observe that content?
Yeah, we won't have enough time. We could probably spend a whole second hour talking about how bad that their presentations are. It is like literally disastrously bad, and it affects how people listen to them. This is the problem the government has right now: is that they don't take seriously that it's really important to actually look good and sound good, because people think of you as less when you don't look and good, especially at that level. They need to treat it like a show. Like, there's no reason to recreate the thing. I mean, someone's got this kooky idea of putting a bunch of people behind the main person. Like, that's gonna, like, I don't know who thought of that, but they should be fired. And I am not like understating that. Fire them. That was a horrible idea. It looks horrible. It's horribly framed. It is low contrast. There's no blacks. I mean, every time I look at it, it comes on the news and I just literally turn it off. I can't look at it. Like, it just, like, it is so bad, and they just all they have to do is don't reinvent the wheel. Just make it a show. You've got 4 people talking. There's a thing called SuperSource, which we talked about yesterday. They can use that. It's incredible. Like, it's been used for the last 30 years. So they, they don't have to recreate all of this stuff. It's just an embarrassment. Our government ability to communicate publicly is an embarrassment, and they need to shape up, or they're losing positive control over their own population because they are so bad at communicating. And this is just another example of that. Next question.
This comes in from Douglas Carmichael. Let's say you have a run of a 1 gigabit Ethernet connection in a stadium to front of house for a live video connection for an event. Would it take a lot of effort to make up an extra long Cat 6 cable or terminate a long fiber connection?
I'm going to keep this just to Rupert because we're trying to get to the hosting, which is we're only got another minute before I'm going to switch over. Go ahead, Rupert.
Not a lot of effort, particularly if you have the right tech and he's got the tools. You can whip that up quite quickly. But if you are prepared with that, chances are you probably have some long cables on hand anyway. I mean, Cat 5e or Cat 6, I mean, that's max length is 300 feet. If you have a couple of those cables on hand, that's your maximum length, and you can just roll that out pretty quick.
It's not banking the cables, it's running them and when you have to run them. Usually you have to run them early, not when you find out that you ran out. That's why logistics of cabling is so important, and why you send 3 or 4 for when you need 1, is because you can't do it later after things have been laid in. All right, now we're going to change subjects and start talking about hosting. So I think that as we get, one of the things that we're going to start doing is trying to have more people. Eventually we'll have more different shows, more different pieces also in office hours. And so this is probably a subject we'll continue to come back to, because my goal is to be not going away anywhere, but slowly backing away a little bit, a couple extra days of where I'm not doing it. And we have some folks that have been helping out with answering questions, and some people that have been helping out with hosting. And what we want to do is kind of all start thinking about it, because I think that I have a vision definitely of someday having, office hours running after hours running 24/7, but office hours running 24/7. There's, with different subjects and different things that we can listen to. And obviously I'm not going to do that. So we need to find, we need to build and also just figure out the best practices, not just for office hours, but as a lot of us are working on these shows, what have been the things that some of us have learned over the last couple decades over hosting. And, we want to take the best practices, but we also want to be ready to throw away the ones that are old, and haven't actually worked as well. So let's go ahead. Does anyone have any? I can say a couple things as we start, but before we get to the questions, if you have questions, go ahead and raise them. There's a lot of questions, so we're not going to spend a lot of time on it. But if anyone here wants to say a couple things about how they approach it or what they think about hosting, go ahead and just raise your hand. You can just raise your physical hand if you have that. And if you don't, I'm just going to keep talking. Yeah, go ahead, Aaron.
I'd say practice empathy and be mindful of where people are coming from. I think that makes a really good host. You do a pretty good job of that, Alex.
Thank you. Tony?
One of my mentors taught me that when you're doing this, your responsibility is to your guests,
right,
but also it's to those who are listening and those who are hearing what this show is about. They are your primary focus.
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead, Leo.
Yeah, and I think going from where Tony has just said, the objective here isn't always to be the voice that you can hear all the time, because you're the consistent voice and you actually want to hear the voice of the other person and the person that you're trying to bring to the stage. And I think sometimes you can sometimes see hosts get stuck into this, like they think the light's on them and the light shouldn't be on them, and it's trying to make sure that the conversation, they're there to control and organize the conversation. It's sort of like how in orchestras, what you're actually wanting to hear is the orchestra and not hearing the conductor.
Guy?
Yeah, I try to look through the participants in our case here and be a proponent or an advocate for them. And I'm just trying to think, what do they want to know? And so that's what's going through my mind is how do I serve the audience? And it's something that I've learned here from you guys. So this is a great platform to get in front of somebody and then, feed information that is pertinent and makes people want to come back.
Yeah, go Jason.
I love the idea of an orchestra. That really is what it's like. The goal is to be the ringleader, to showcase and be an MC, to craft what you have, the people you have, and the inputs and the outputs into something that your audience wants, and to do so smoothly does require some practice and some finesse. But at the end of the day, that is the ultimate purpose.
Good, Bianca.
I just wonder how you're able to host and add your idea and listen to everybody at the same time. Like, I just think that's a mammoth task. And if somebody else is host, I wonder if they're going to have the same amount of knowledge as you do to be able to comment at the end of everybody's answers.
In this one little world, I'll tell you a little bit about how I approached a lot of these things, is that in the world of media production, I've been fortunate enough to, I started when I was 10. So I have 40 years of I started programming graphics, and that's all I was programming was graphics when I was 10 years old, and I was taking pictures with K1000s and stuff like that. And so I do have a breadth and depth that is not totally normal. And I was fortunate enough to work in radio, so I was a host 30 years ago. So I have some experience in this area, and I do think that makes a difference in how we do what we're doing. That said, I think that I've progressed dramatically over the last year and a half working with everyone here. And so my thoughts about hosting have changed as a reaction to working with everyone here more than they changed over the last 30 years before that. So there are some things that are, I think, constant from what I have done, which is that I think of the host a lot of times. A strong host is a little bit like in American football, a quarterback. You have to throw the ball to people. One of the things that's really important for hosts is to let everyone know who's going to talk next and how it's going to work. And so we have a way to do that. We built tools that allow us to do it. This what we're doing here is impossible almost anywhere else in the world. I don't see this happen anywhere smoothly because there's not a protocol, to make that actually work. But before that, if I'm if I'm doing a round table or something like that, I almost always will throw the ball to someone. I don't say, what do we think? Like that's a really classic weak host position, is to say, okay, what do you guys think? And now there's either everyone talks over top of each other, or there's an uncomfortable silence as everyone tries to figure out who goes next. And you can get through that. You see that in MacBreak, because in MacBreak we can do that because Leo is incredibly strong host. He knows what he wants to do and he knows where he wants to go. He can let Renee and Andy and I, you'll hear us sometimes too loudly grunt or start a word. We're telling the other ones that we want to say something next. So like that's like this kind of like weird thing that goes on in ours. We know each other well enough that if we start hearing something, we know who's going to go after that person, but we're like lining ourselves up because we don't have the tools that we have here, right? In MacBreak. And so we've gotten through that because of that. Now, other things that I approach it is that I, as Tony said, is that I really view myself as an advocate for the audience. So that is my job. As the host, my job is to advocate for the audience. And that means when someone's talking too much, my job is to cut them off. And that is my job. Like I get tweets about like people upset with Leo. You keep on cutting Alex off. And I'm like, that's his job. His job is to cut me off. He has to decide, what that is. And what's funny about that is that if you ever go to a dinner with a bunch of hosts, I've been to some of these dinners. What we learned is that almost all hosts are ADD. And so it allows them to manage lots of things at one time. ADD is not really, as someone who has ADD.
It's a superpower.
Superpower. Like those of us who have, some of us have it, like we kind of see that as a superpower, is because it's not really being distracted. It's being able to manage many things at one time in your head. And it does get distracting if you don't process it, but it is a really powerful tool. So people who can do it can take control of that superpower. You're paying attention to lots of things at one time seamlessly without any problem. So what happens is that you have to kind of manage all those things. But what's interesting about hosts is that you go to a dinner with them and the train of thought just spirals out of control. Like literally you're 30 seconds on every subject, and it just keeps moving, and it moves very smoothly because we're all hosts. So we're all pushing it, and they all overlap. Like whatever it jumps to, it's not like we go this way and then we go 90 degrees. It just kind of goes like this, and then it just keeps spinning. It's like this big, but it's because we all have a very short attention span. And the interesting thing is that that's important. I learned over time is because hosts have to get bored before the audience. So hosts that want to listen to everything that person says, you may be interested in that, but you always have to think of, is my audience going to be interested in that? And that is something that you have to cut. A host has to cut things off before the person's done talking, and move it here. Like for instance, within office hours, I try to subtly tell our panelists, who sometimes get it and sometimes not. But if you hear me go, "Yep," as soon as I say "yep," that is my nonverbal, that is my verbal cue, like to say, "Let's go." Because I feel like the answer, either you're going down a bad path, or you're drawing it out too far, or or we've already answered the question. And so there's and I have to make that decision. And the hard part with it, as Tony was talking about as well, is that you have to be gentle with the folks that you're, the panelists. And no matter how they're coming in, whether they're all volunteers like we have here, or they're VIPs, there is a gentleness that has to happen with a host that has to occur, because that's the way that you're going to get the most out of their presentation, their being there. If you're constantly putting them on edge, some people like to do that. That's people who like to put other people on edge don't want to deal with that person very often. They don't want to bring them back, because getting put on edge in front of a lot of people is not, so there's attack hosts, on these news organizations that attack people. They don't care about whether they ever see them again, but if you want to actually see them again, and you actually want people to be, feel like they got to be able to say what they're going to say. The other thing you have to do is also look at how you draw things out. So sometimes someone can be very much a yes/no person, and you have to figure out, how am I going to get that person to elaborate? So, when someone asks like, what are the keys to hosting? I always say, cut them off when they're talking too much, draw it out when they're not, when they're not talking enough, and throw the ball to somebody. Like, don't leave it wide open to make that work. The last thing I'll say is, like, here, one of the things you'll notice that I didn't start with but I learned to do inside of office hours, is that I do try to, my attempt at every question is not to answer it. So my attempt at every question is to the panelists answer the question, and the only time you'll see me answer the question first. Now, sometimes I go to somebody. The only time I'm answering it is because no one's raised their hand in the back. And so but otherwise, I want to. And you'll see when I just say next question, that's me saying, yeah, these guys solved it. They did it either as well or better than I would have. It's oftentimes better. They have the expertise in that certain area, and so. So my goal at every question is not to say anything. If I fill something in, it just feels like, oh, that'll put a bow on it. And I try to, I try to put a bow on different things. And again, I think that's the advantage of having done this for a long time in a lot of different areas. But sometimes I do it too much when I think about it a lot the rest of the day. Anyway, so, but I think that's something that I've kind of learned at the beginning of office hours. I didn't do that. So I was talking too much, and what it does is it takes the participation out of from the panelists, and so you want to hear their point of view first, and then and again, my goal at every question is to not answer it, and so and so I think that's a challenge to do that. Anyway, so let's go ahead. Does anyone have anything else they want to say before we go into it, Marty?
Yeah, that. The concept of orchestration is a really good one, because as a conductor, you need to be totally prepared. You need to be so familiar with your topic. So if you're doing like we do a topic-oriented show, and preparation is really key. Yeah. It's not to say that you have to dominate the conversation, which I'm must admit I'm sometimes guilty of, but I have to know the strength of all of my panelists to know that we can cover the topic sufficiently, right, and carry the conversation as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, go ahead, Jeffrey.
One thing I will add to everything that's been said with great information is scripting, and it's just as simple as getting your intro and outro done. If you ever watch the beginning of office hours, Alex has an intro. He has what he's going to say. It does change a little bit, but for the most part, that's pretty much a script. And when I started in the podcasting realm, I was always, when I was driving to and from different places, I would always practice that script on how to get things, because if you have a good script, you can counter almost any issue, any problem from there.
Let's jump into the questions.
Okay, first up is from Douglas Carmichael. One of my concerns with the Office Hours 2.0 show design and architecture is the accessibility and inclusivity for disabled panelists. Depending upon the disability, they may not fit in the framing box. Will the architecture be able to allow for this?
It's probably a question for tomorrow, because it's more about the architecture than hosting. But we talked about this a little bit in after hours. The one thing I will say is that there's a lot of things we want to do over time. We need to think about what we can do immediately. So things will progress. I only play one game. Like I have to limit it not because I don't like games, because I like them too much. So I play a desktop tower defense game called Kingdom Rush. I only play one level. There's only one level in it I play. I play it about once a day. And the key thing about it that I find interesting is the use of constrained resources. How do you at the beginning, you want to put up big towers, you want to do all this stuff. You don't have the bots, you don't have the dollars to do that. You have to do it little piece by piece, and you have to slowly build that process up. And so what you're going to see, the reason I talk about that is that we have no budget. We've built something incredible to do that with no budget, and it will take us time to make everything accessible. So we just have to understand that that's going to take a little bit of work, and it could take time, to make it work. It won't happen immediately. Next question.
Going to Juan C. Robles in Mexico. He says, is there a technique or techniques to politely cut off a panelist that is misbehaving?
Go ahead, Tim.
Yeah, so it's a few things really that happen here. And number one is, I think you need to be prepared, at least knowing the general direction that you're going to go with whatever the hosting is. and be prepared, and then set those expectations up front. Like, hey, there's a bunch of people here today, and we're going to, try to include as many as possible, those kinds of things. Also, I think stop the monologues. Sometimes people just get going and going and going. And after the first, paragraph or so, you're just, unless it's really interesting, everybody kind of has this magical switch that they turn off, and they'll look away, they'll be looking at their phones, they'll just be thinking about something else. And why even have those words go out then at that point, because it's just not really worth it. So that's again, stay focused on the subject matter, and then, don't let one or two people dominate the whole thing, because somehow people are very good at internalizing their eye rolling. You know what I'm saying? That like, someone will again have that answer, again have the same, kind of focus, and they jump in really good. And typically those people aren't even that articulate. They just kind of go on and on. They like to hear themselves talk. Yep. So, having a direction.
Yeah, Leo.
So there's lots of ways of doing it, but there's two key things. First of all is you've got to tell your panelists and the people what you're expecting out of them and what you're expecting on this and how you will interrupt them. We use StreamYard for quite a lot of events, and in StreamYard there is different views, and one of the views is where you've got a big person in a big screen and everybody in a little screen, and we tell panelists that when you see that screen flip back so that everybody is in the grid, it means we are telling you that's the end of your answer to that question and you need to refer back. So it's a subtle way of doing it to warn them that they're going to see that. It doesn't work every single time, but it's worked on a lot of occasions to get people who just are going on too long.
Jeffrey?
This is where scripting actually becomes a very important part, because then you can say, hey, can I get 2 or 3 people to come in and be not on your show, of course, but on the side. And then you can kind of practice what you're going to do to kind of put them in line or remove them, or however you're going to handle that. Because it really depends from show to show. There might be some shows where you definitely want people to do that to a level, and then there's shows where that's just not tolerated. And so by practicing it several times, it'll be easy for you to do it. And sometimes you can do it very quietly, and sometimes you just have to be very blunt about it, and then at least you've chosen the right words to say when you have to be that blunt.
Yeah, one of the things that I'm always looking for is a point to insert myself. So there's when someone's kind of going off or doing that, that you look for how you're going to cut into that. I think of Aikido a lot, is using wherever they're going and trying to have another thing that's about it to go out, to pull it to some other place quickly. Next question.
Another one coming in from Juan C. Robles in Mexico. Is there a list or top 5 things that a host must be attentive to during a show?
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
I'd be the opposite. On my lists are always take away the distractions, anything that could pull you away from a show. But for a list, just basically my big other thing is have everything in an area where you are looking in just one area, but not a whole ton of areas for whatever you're talking about or doing.
You go with Jason.
I'm not going to go with a perfect 5-person or 5-thing list. Be attentive. Don't be doing other things. There's a temptation to do that sometimes. A lot of us have a lot of monitors. Just because we have a teleprompter doesn't mean we have to be. You just got to be present. Know your audience and know the people that you're with, and be comfortable and familiar with your topic, or you're just going to ramble. I'd say those are the best that I can think of.
Go ahead, Leo.
I'm going to steal one from David Paskin, who said it last night, and it's know when to end, know when to stop the event, because many go on too long.
I think there's a Kenny Rogers song about that. Anyway, Vienna.
Sorry, I have top 3, and that's time, and time. And that's why I really like the timer that we use on office hours, because it just distributes the energy of the questions a little bit more evenly, and also just starting on time and ending on time is just really important. Getting panelists to come in on time is also important. It's just basic professionalism.
I think as you do hosting, you just really always want to think about the fact that the quality of the guest is often related to the quality of the host. And when you make it about them, that they have the quality or not, then you're taking the responsibility, handing it away from somebody else. It's not all you, but I've seen hosts pull incredible things out of people, and then that same person goes somewhere else with another host and has it completely. It's like the frog in the little Warner Brothers thing, where it's just suddenly it's not that anymore. The host has a huge impact on what a person says and how they say it. Next question.
Next question comes in from Tobias Moss in Minneapolis. He says, when there isn't yet a critical mass of question-asking participants, how can you still employ the hosted Q&A style?
Go ahead, Leo.
First of all, Tobias, I'm hoping you're coming on my show tonight. But the main thing on this is I've realized that I've tried lots and lots of options on this. And you've got to make it so that the people who are actually watching the show can ask the question as simply as possible. I did try Slido. I have tried other things, but it is, as you say, it's a critical mass. If you haven't got the critical mass, don't try and enforce a system that is going to actually restrict the number of questions. It's only worth putting something like Makana in play when you have the volume that you can actually use it. And so while I tried it, I've actually, for tonight's thing, I'm pulling it back off until we get back up to a larger mass.
Go ahead, and Aaron.
I think this is where preparation comes in. You need to think of things to talk about, and you need to have a good list of things to talk about. And if you want, you can ask questions, like if it's, a panel thing or a Q&A, then you can have a list of questions to ask. I think we deal with this on Tony's show quite a bit with Tlaloc and me and other people, and Chris Clark doing a lot of the question asking, which are good questions, like really good questions. So preparation is I think key if there isn't critical mass. I don't think we really have that problem on office hours, but in general, yeah.
Fiona.
Basically what Aaron said, he stole my answer. And I think it's good to do that preparation. And when I MC, I have a list of questions on the side to either to ask everyone first or to ask later if we need to. So it's a backup. The other thing is, if we can go off a question that has already been answered, we could refer back to that person's question and say, that person's previous question relates to this question now. Let's tie that in. Let's bring some more ideas in with that question. So you could probably use or recycle previous questions if you really needed to.
Yeah, go ahead, Jeffrey.
So there's also other ways that you can have questions asked. You can, if you're promoting the show for a week and somebody sends you an email, for example, you can bring that email on and ask that question. If you post it up on the socials and somebody brings in a question from there, you can definitely bring that in. You can say, hey, earlier in the week while I was promoting this, somebody asked this question, and I think this is a good time to actually do this. One thing I highly suggest to avoid is the term that you might hear in podcasting and everything, and that's fake it till you make it. You don't want to have a little Timmy writes type question in there, because some people can really see that and say, wait a minute, these questions aren't real.
Courtney.
One thing you can have is kind of transition the show from Q&A to a topic discussion, kind of like what TWiT does. Leo has a list of topics they're going to discuss during that show. And if you're not getting Q&A from the panelist or from the viewers out there, you can go to a list of topics to discuss that are pertinent to whatever the subject of the show is.
Marty?
I'll often peruse the socials to see what other people are asking, in Facebook groups or such, and see what conversations are going on. And I'll have those in my back pocket to bring up if I need something new to talk about.
Yeah, and one of the things is that that if you tell people ahead of time that you're doing it, as people have said a couple times, you can pre-cache a lot of those questions that you're going to use. We do here for second hours, we do 10 to 15 minutes. I tell people, like, when you're going to come on, there's going to be 10 or 15 minutes of discussion. That is to prime the pump. That is to provide our audience to hear about the subject that they may not know and come up with questions, where I'm not trying to just go right out into questions. Now, if we go right out into questions, it's because there's a ton of questions. I'm worried about getting through them. But I've learned even then I want to go through 5 or 10 minutes with whoever the new subject is to kind of just set the pace, because otherwise you sometimes don't even get to what they were here for, because there's so many questions. Now, this is a huge argument, by the way, for not doing individual events and doing regular events, because this is a symbiotic relationship between the viewer and the host and the people who are coming in. And you, by doing it over and over and over again, you're training your audience that you're actually going to take their questions. And we are talking about questions every single day, and we have no problem with generating enough questions for every single day. Go ahead, Tony.
So one of the things that I've been doing since, everybody knows, this is an evolving thing with Conversations with Tony Mobley. And so I started out not having any questions of my own at all. I just wanted questions to be generated by those who were participating. And then it became apparent that it was good for me to have a couple of questions of my own. And then it occurred that I really should have questions of my own in between the questions that people were asking. Last night was a totally different experience for me because the majority of the questions were my questions. And there was not a lot of questions that were asked by other people. But, we have our ringer, Dr. Chris Clark, who's going to always come in and bring some great questions. But the majority of the questions were mine. And when a question was asked by someone else that was my question, well, I didn't ask that question. And so I think it's an evolving thing. I think it's a thing that you have to prepare for, because I prepare my questions way in advance. And yesterday, it was a totally different thing because I didn't read my questions at all. They were placed in in Mukana. And that made a tremendous amount of difference from the standpoint of, number one, I'm not looking at my notes to read the question. It's on the screen. I'm reading it from there. And so it made a tremendous amount of difference. Now, it'll be difficult for me now to go back to the way I was doing it before. And I just, I'm just so thankful for the team to make those suggestions, and we're tweaking it and we're failing forward. And it's really a great experience. Again, thank you, everyone.
Good guy.
Yeah, Tony picked up a total key distinction there. It's being present, being in the moment, and not going to the script. Just because you have the script doesn't mean you have to go to the script. Like if you know that the conversation's flowing, you can snap a guest right out of the conversation by saying, and we're going to go to a question, when you had them, you had them in the flow. So it's part of growing is knowing when that conversation's flowing and when to go to the question.
Still think that we should listen to Kenny Rogers at the end of this. Anyway, so good, Jason.
The other thing is that there is no perfect formula. Tony is a wonderful host, and he evokes an entirely different energy than something I could ever do on the air. And I've been doing this for a really long time. There isn't always better or worse. There is just different. Pursue it and practice it, and I think you'll find your own voice.
And those subtle things that we do, making sure that say the person's name and location, making sure that oftentimes when we do shows, we don't do it, but when we do shows, we make sure they have an iPad. We're like, we want an iPad over a teleprompter because we want you to pick the iPad up on camera and look down at it. And when people see the connection of that, it makes a huge difference in how often people will ask questions. Next question.
Kind of click 3 times. Sorry, new mouse. Another accessibility question coming in from Douglas Carmichael. He says, how would we on Office Hours 2.0 handle a host or panelist with a reading or a speech disability who wish to participate? Would the Office Hours 2.0 architecture be flexible enough to loosen any timing constraints or provide for a coach to help on comms if needed?
I think in a lot of cases, I think that you have to figure out in after hours, how far how to make that work. So I think that that's what we'll kind of constantly be working through there. Now, let's go to the next question.
Sorry. Next question. Juan C. Robles in Mexico says, how much change the hosting style and the way of leading the show when the show is Q&A versus second hour with a guest?
Go ahead, Leo.
So this is quite an interesting thing, is keeping to a formula, but maybe changing the formula in the order that it does. So today I have a guest on our show, and what we're going to do is we're going to have the guest first and the Q&A after. It also enables us to make sure that the guest has the full amount of time and that we want to run to it, and we can always stack questions and use questions another day. I think it works very well in office hours that it's the other way around, because you have enough questions to do it. But I think in a lot of shows, I would say that sometimes it doesn't quite work that way around. The difficulty with it, of doing it the way I'm going to do it, is we've got to make sure that the guest is cuts to a point. Otherwise, it just can be quite long if they go on.
Yeah, the design of office hours is pretty specific, and it's that we want people to warm up before we go into the second hour. Now, I will say that isn't the design of it. Really was, just to kind of give a little bit of background on the second hour, it was just going to be office hours. We're all just going to ask questions. Office hours for the newbies used to be really 1 hour, just 7 to 8, and then we move on. We added the second hour because we just felt like there were certain questions and certain things we want to talk about that took longer than 3 or 4 minutes. And we're like, why don't we create a second hour? We talk about something for a long time, and we had we've had some great folks that are able to jump on. So the second hour kind of grew organically, but it definitely is something that we've learned over time is really powerful. Now with clients, we work a lot with clients in telling them, like, the standard practice for a 50-minute, let's say, session, 40 minutes of talking and 10 minutes of questions. And we're like, you need to flip that. 10 minutes of talking, 40 minutes of questions. That is what you should be thinking about. And the thing is that gets easier and easier and easier when you do repetition. So when you repeat your events, Tim, you've got an open mic, Tim. Tim, your mic is open. And so you have to, the main thing is that I lost my train of thought. So it's important to keep our mics off. Anyway, next question.
All right. From A. Mitchells in Washington, is voting important to hosting?
Go ahead, Aaron.
Audience feedback is important to hosting. On virtual things, you don't have any audience feedback, so you need it somehow on virtual, and voting is how you need it, how you get it.
One way, yeah. Rupert?
Yeah, it's incredible richness of for data. If you've got a load of questions and you can see those votes just actively being participated in, and it just gives you a extra insight to how the audience is doing, and particularly if you have a guest, that just gives you an extra kind of nudge to know that you're presenting questions that the audience are invested in.
Yeah, the voting for us has been really important. I've been doing voting systems for over a decade, and I do feel like, when people vote a question up, they become a stakeholder in that question. That increases their interest in the show because they're waiting for that question to be answered, and when that question gets answered, they're getting positive feedback over the fact that it's acknowledged as something that they thought was important, and then it was voted on. It's more valuable when there's a down arrow. so that up arrow means more when they can say, no, I don't want to watch that. It also makes folks more accountable for their questions, that they have to write them in a way. So the down vote changes when people are ready for it, changes the way that they craft their question. We're pretty understanding here, but we've used a sister thing to Makana in much larger audiences. And what's amazing is how quickly the audience will sort questions out with the down arrow, where they just cut through it like butter. And every single time we've ever done it, the top questions are the right questions, like every single time. Like if you have a handful of troublemakers, our audience here is relatively small. This is when we have 1,000 or 2,000 or 3,000 or 10,000 people. But the hive mentality works almost every single time. For us, it's worked every single time. Like the questions that we get are like, we'll get when we did it for MacBreak, we were doing it for a little while in MacBreak and 2,000 people. This is probably 10 years ago. I think Leo, it was so popular that I think that there was a little concern that that Leo had over it becoming the thing instead of the IRC, because it was what would happen is we get 75 questions in 10 minutes. And then they'd all get cleaned up into about 6 or 8 questions like that. Like it was just like, and all the questions were the right ones for that week. I mean, it was just like, it just immediately separated out quickly. But you can't do that with only up arrows, but the up arrows are important because they connect people to that question. And there's a lot of things you can do with that down the road too. So I think that it is not only important, it is key to the operation. Go ahead, Courtney.
And the brilliance of the Mocana system that Alex has constructed here and Chris has constructed here is that it sorts the questions based on the votes that they get in the queue for bringing up the question. So the person is asking the questions, puts them in the order of the most popular first. So you deal with the ones that are going to be of interest to more people first, and then the ones that are downvoted are lower as you come toward the end of the show.
And we get to most of them. In other systems that we use where there's 1,000 people or 2,000 people watching, we just get to the ones we get to, and there's hundreds of them that just don't get answered at that moment, but sometimes, we have some of our clients will go back and take all the questions and literally send an email out to every single person with an answer, so that's another way to, so if they're only going to do it once, they're going to make sure that you walked away with that answer, at least from them, even if it wasn't used in the show. The other way that we've done it, by the way, is we don't have this in this tool, but we've done it in ways where you can answer the questions via text as well as on the air. And then you can increase the answer velocity to incredible numbers, 200 an hour kind of thing. Next question.
Coming in from Vienna in Australia says, what are the similarities and differences between hosting or emceeing in-person events compared with hosting online events?
Go ahead, Jason.
I'm going to go with the differences, at least first. The major difference is that a great deal of your body language in person denotes your comfort, your flexibility, kind of your engagement with the audience. Whereas here, can you imagine if somebody went on stage and did this? It would just be, unless it was a comedy routine, it's completely unheard of. The similarities are that the end result is you're still a ringleader, no matter what your platform is.
Go ahead, Leo.
So I'd say there's a lot of similarities, actually, and it's also a skill. So being an MC is a very different skill to being a panelist of certain things and being able to control things. I've done a lot of events where I've been an MC, or I've also run a lot of meetings, and you need to know that you're bringing the energy as well. If you don't bring energy as an MC, then the rest of the panel doesn't bring an energy, and it's in controlling that and also being strong enough to turn around and stop people. I know that this is part of this question and part of others, but it's a core fundamental, the why some events work, some events don't. You go to an event, it doesn't matter how good the content is. Sometimes you walk out bored because the MC didn't drive it, and they have to drive the questions and they have to drive that. So I would say they're very similar skills, and some people are really good at it and some people it's just not where they're based.
And because of the number of questions and because it's the second hour, I'm going to accelerate a little bit. For our panelists, if you already see 2 people with their hands up, don't put your hand up. We're just going to cut it at 2 all the way down just so that we can get through them, because we can't really send these back to people because I don't know when we're going to come back to this conversation. Next question. Oh, can't hear you.
Another one coming in from Vienna in Australia. What tips do you have for a first-time host on Office Hours 2.0?
Know how you're going to start the show, although so far I've started the shows for folks, but knowing how you're going to get into the show and knowing how you're going to get out of the show are always the first 2 things. And then again, the way I look at it is try not to answer the questions. So the goal is to have the panelists answer the questions. And then your job is really to, again, extend things out when it makes sense at the end as the host, or cut people off when they're talking too much. And then, have people feel acknowledged. Those are the key pieces of that puzzle. So, yeah. Next question.
From Rupert McCrae in Dallas, Texas. This just came up, this topic. Can the panel discuss the importance of time management when hosting, like keeping the run of show hitting markers, leaving time for the unexpected, wrapping things up? How do you divide the time available to the elements of the show?
Go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, of course it's important. And that starts with being early, doing a dress rehearsal, and understanding what you're going to do, especially if you're doing a paid event. You know, if you're emceeing something where there is a very fixed outline, you're getting paid to get through that entire list and to keep people entertained while it's happening.
Yeah, go ahead, Leo.
One of the things I see a lot of times happens is people start really slowly and then they just drift on and say we've got plenty of time, and then they rush at the end and they rush the most important part of the meeting. I actually try and do things at full speed and end early, and I think in a way if you can end early and you get through everything, it's a damn sight better than actually having a really good subject that you never actually paid attention to because you ran out of time because you were just wasting too much time, as I am now, on one question.
Very good. Next question.
Coming in from A. Mitchell's in Washington, says, is being present as a host important? There was a question during this show about a topic that was raised recently at an event. The host, so it seems, this is an important subject people are wondering about. Thanks.
So I'll answer the first part because I don't quite understand the second half. The first part is it's very important as a host to be present, and I do a pretty good job. For instance, my Wi-Fi was out for the first half of the show, and there was a whole bunch of things in the back end that people were telling me my Wi-Fi's out. I'm so present most of the time. I didn't read it. Like, I don't see that column, because I'm paying so much attention to everyone here. I look at the questions in the column and the questions in the column, and I'm barely looking at that. It's something that I have to fix on my end. But when I leave it on, that's what happens. And so, yeah, it's very important. It's also why it is one thing when you think about hosting. I'll just say this last bit. Is that this is why you want support staff to allow you to be in the conversation and not trying to do a whole bunch of other things. The most common thing for small events is hosts who think they can do everything. I want someone to ask the questions. I want someone to cut the show. I want someone to pay attention to all those little details. I want to spread that out among other people. And so many hosts want to do it all themselves. They want to be the host and they want to be a presenter. They want to be the host and they want to ask the questions. And it's just too many. It's too many things. And what that ends up being is micro stalls of attention that cause, that make it not a show that you want to really watch. Next question.
We were all looking for ways to subtly tell you about your wife.
I know. I looked at it. I finally looked at it and I was like, oh no. Like all the way up, there was all these. Yeah, there you go. You can do that. And by the way, you guys can do that if you want what Guy just did, because when someone else is answering the question, they're probably full screen. And so while they're answering the question, you can tell me that visually. There you go. Okay. All right. Next question.
From Rupert McCrae in Dallas, Texas, said, should there be one person allowed to speak to the host on comms?
Go ahead, Stuart. Can't hear you, Stuart.
Yes. There's very few people who can deal with multiple conversations going on in their ear at one time. Most of them end up working as directors, not as hosts. So yeah, always have one person talking to the host and leading the questions, and they will have a rapport they will build up to do this properly.
Go ahead, Aaron.
Yeah, the only thing I would add to that is have a backup have a backup human to talk in case something goes wrong with somebody's comms.
And the big thing is when you're talking to someone who's hosting is generally don't talk to them while they're talking. So you'll see that as a news host, if they have a problem with audio, but if you see this, where they just, and they do it really slowly and they'll just go like this and do it down. That's either you're talking, the most common reason for that is them telling them you're talking while I'm talking. Like that is the most common time we see that, but it's also like, I don't want to listen to you anymore because whatever you're saying, I'm not interested in as a host. Next question.
Coming in from Rupert McCrae in Dallas says, how many computers and devices and monitors are ideal for hosting?
Go ahead, Jason.
Exactly the number that you need to do what you need to do and exactly no more.
I don't think you can have too many monitors. I think it's just the amount of molecules that are available in front of you that don't have a monitor already in them. So I think that's about the maximum number. You just do want to try to keep all your information as close to the camera angle as possible, though. Next question.
Coming in from Josh Kaufman in Pittsburgh, PA, says, what is the best way to interrupt a runaway guest to bring the show back into the conversation mode, particularly for an introvert or more laid-back host? Might a better selection of leading questions help?
Go ahead, Jason.
I would say this is a matter of figuring out who the people who are going to have the microphone beforehand. But then after that, just smile and reiterate, the rules, or reiterate, Alex is really good at this. He will smile while criticizing, and it actually works. No, I'm not kidding. Like, this is something that, I've done too, and I had to catch myself, and I'm like, wait, where have I seen? I've done that. It absolutely works.
One thing you want to try to do is you want to try to avoid correcting people on air whenever you can possibly. It's the last thing you do. What I'm usually looking for is something that they're saying, and you're like, it's a moving train, and you got to figure out when to jump on. But if they're running on, you're trying to look for something that they're saying that you can ask either, or say something that is related to what they just said, but allows you to take that conversation back. Then you can hand it back to them. Next question.
I'll try and read this one as fast as I can. Chris Taylor from Carlsbad, California says, how do you...
You don't have to do that. It's all good. It's all good. No, go ahead.
Question. Okay. How do you constructively criticize a host or a speaker to encourage them to speed up their speech cadence on the average listening speed to the average listening speed of the audience? There's no way to click 1.5 speed live in a podcast.
Go ahead, Jason.
This is just one of these things that you get used to. And I was born in a part of the country where you speak quickly no matter what. And I've actually had to slow myself down. So I think the answer is figure out who's going to be on the microphone, and they will follow suit, and reiterate the rules before a Q&A part.
Yeah. Go ahead, Vienna.
I'd be really interested to know what you call the average listening speed of the audience. Like, how do you measure that? But aside from that is... you can't, because the panelists are already busy trying to think of how to answer the question. They're not going to be thinking about how to best speed up or slow down their speech. So it's too much load for them. So just let them speak naturally.
Once you're in a show, don't try to fix anything about a person, like whether they say uhs or ahs, or whether they speak fast or slow. You don't, or even before the show, there's a time when once they get into their head, they're not going to be the same guest that you were going to have. So the key is to dance with it. Next question.
This one coming in from Rupert McCrae here on the panel in Dallas, Texas. What signals can a host learn to communicate back to the production team, like winks, nods, ear scratching?
Yeah, go ahead, Stuart.
This is actually backwards. Those who watched Full Course Yellow before office hours would have seen Brett Ramsey, the host. This is somebody who I've known since the mid-90s.
We're going to have to be really quick about it. I am going to correct you as the host, as we got to move really fast. No stories. You just got to say what you got to say. But, you can't, no stories.
Well, Brett's got a whole heap of physical tells. Yeah. And as a director, I had to learn those. So I know when he wants to move forward. I know when he wants to cut. I know when to insert things because I'm listening to the voice. So it's actually the other way around. The team behind the camera learns what the host is going to do.
Yeah. Go ahead, Courtney.
When the director is communicating with the host who's on camera, generally the host will acknowledge with a little nod that will acknowledge that they got the message, or if they're putting something on the prompter or something for him to read silently.
Yeah, and to Stuart's point, the integration, and to Courtney's point, the integration between teams that know each other, they'll learn what there is to say about those things in those areas. Next question.
Coming in from Rupert McCrae in Dallas once again, what are the must-have hosting creature comforts or desktop gadgets?
Go ahead, Stuart.
A good seat, something to keep the voice working, and something to keep the blood sugar up.
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
Place to put your coffee, definitely. But it depends on if you're hosting or if you're controlling as well. And then a good gadget, of course, keeping your hands off the keyboard and mouse and using like a Stream Deck or something like that to really have stuff at your fingertips so you don't have to look down.
Next question.
Okay, coming in from Rupert McCrae in Dallas also, how long should a host work without a break?
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
Yeah, this has always been a question because a lot of people are saying you got to be on your show every single day and do that, and I hate that answer. It really should be on your time schedule. So if you need a break, you should take a break. Otherwise, you're going to fade out, and then your show's not going to happen. I've had many shows that have had that.
And that's as a creator. As a host, I would say, it depends on the host. I mean, they need a bio break every 2 or 3 hours, typically. This is where you want to program, and this is more of a programming question than a host question, I think, or more of a programming answer, is that you program in playback. Playback is super valuable because it gives the whole crew a moment. And so we can talk about that in show design, but you want to create places where there's 2 or 3 minutes. You look for places that I can add 2 or 3 minutes of something to play out, because that gives us a time to talk off air. That gives us time to restructure things, fix a thing, do a bunch of other things. And so I try to do that at least once an hour. Is there's a 2 or 3 minute gap somewhere that we can do that, and then we move forward. Next question.
Coming in from Don Modine in Manchester, Connecticut, says, how do you deal with guests that are boring or who are not good at answering questions or have no interest in answering a question at all?
Go ahead, Leo.
So one of the ways I do deal with this is always to have two hosts, because then I find that with two people answering questions and getting different audio and different voices coming in, you can get different answers. It also means that you can actually throw the answer to the other host, so you can answer and go backwards and forwards between yourselves. And sometimes you find that when you do that, you will re-engage the person because they suddenly realize they're not in the conversation. So that's the way I deal with it.
Go ahead, Vienna.
To a large extent, it's not your job.
It's your job to only pull it out of them. Like there's definitely people who may not be that exciting, and I've seen hosts pull something out of them they find something in there that turns them on. Almost everybody has something that's going to get them excited, and they're going to start talking about it. I don't always succeed, but if I interview someone and they end up being boring, that's my fault. Like I will always take it as not my fault, but my accountability, and it is to pull a great conversation out of anyone. You don't know how good someone is in a sunny day. You know how good they are in a rainy day. So, and in this case, a slow guest is a rainy day, and the great hosts will pull something out of them that people want to listen to. Next question.
From A. Mitchells in Washington says, define hosts. Thanks.
Go ahead, Jason.
The host is the person whose job it is to kind of present whatever it is that is in the middle of the ring. So you don't go to the Barnum and Bailey circus for Barnum and Bailey. You go for the animals, the clowns, you get the idea.
Yep. Next question.
Coming from Rupert McCrae here in the panel and from Dallas, says, for hosting live, is it a good idea to have a designated deputy host planned in advance in case of any problems?
Go ahead, Leo.
Yeah, so as I said, I think it works really, really well. It also means that for the audience that they're used to hearing multiple voices, and normally once you've got a good patter with the host, so I do a lot of things with David Paskin on stuff now, and people get used to hearing us, and we know where to pick up when the other person isn't answering the answers.
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
Yeah, just don't introduce a deputy host just on the whim. Bring them in and bring them to be part of that, but also don't make it feel like that you're tag teaming any type of interviewee, because sometimes that can happen with multiple hosts.
Yeah, definitely distributing that is really important. It also gives you something to do if you need to stretch. If you have two people, you'll see a lot of live shows will almost always have two people on there. That allows people to take breaks if they have to, and it also allows them to stretch if they need to. It's easier for them to talk to each other than someone just stringing it out. Next question.
This one from Stuart Whaley says, is the Makana environment available to other people to host their meetings with?
Yeah, you can contact us on the back end. It's still difficult and slow and expensive, but but we're in the process of making that easier. Next question.
Coming in from Rupert McCrae in Dallas says, is hosting a live discussion more authentic than hosting a recorded or post-produced session?
Go ahead, Stuart.
Yes, you can always tell. Look at the Apple thing the other day versus what we're doing right now. They wanted it to look live, but it was actually recorded.
Yeah, I think that, when you do it as a record, you just want to be much more succinct. Like you want to cut all the air out of it, because that's what we're there for. Is now you have to hold the attention a lot more when you're doing it as a VOD than as you do it as live. Next question.
This one comes in from Douglas Carmichael. He says, what communication tools are useful for production staff to communicate with the host?
I mean, the big ones that we have are IFB into their ear, teleprompter right in front of them, and then potentially in some cases text, if we need to. So those are the primary tools that we use to do that. Phone call if it's an emergency. Next question.
From Don Modine Come on, Mouse. From Don Modine, what are the differences between hosting office hours versus a talk show? What rules apply to both?
Go ahead, Rupert.
Something that applies to both. I think one of the similarities maybe is that in both cases you serve at the pleasure of your audience. If you lose your audience, you've lost your show.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that on top of that, this is a more difficult environment to host. I think you're paying attention to a lot of people. You're paying attention to a lot of things coming in at one time, as well as a lot of panelists. And I think it's more challenging, but I also think I find it to be much more rewarding as well. Next question.
From Juan C. Robles in Mexico says, what is the worst thing you should do when hosting?
Go ahead, Jason.
I think there's a double negative in there that's not intended. So I'm going to say, what is the worst thing you can do as a host? In this case, I would say divide your audience. Profanity, anything that upsets people or reminds them that they are different, that's about as bad as it gets.
Rupert?
Yeah, much the same, and piggybacking on my last answer also, I think the worst thing you can do is disregard your audience or, in any way disrespect them, or just lose sight of the fact that they're bringing their time to your show. And if you don't treat it with respect, then I think that's one of the worst things you can do.
Yeah, I think not knowing where you're going to go next is one of the worst things. Also, putting down your panelists, I think, is something you want to try to avoid. Kind of pushing at them. I think that there's a tendency that some of us have to do that. To be sarcastic and so on and so forth. You'll find that I don't do that very often on the show. And if I am, I know them really well, and I know that's going. But I don't. And I also be very, very careful. And this is for our panelists too, but be very, very careful of being funny. Like funny is as we've seen in news recently, funny is a fissionable device, and when it works, it's amazing, and it doesn't work most of the time. So you do want to be funny, and you want to kind of play with your audience in that sense, but just be careful of everybody that's listening and everybody in your panel and everybody how they're going to handle that. Because I've been guilty of it as much as anyone else, of dropping a bomb that I thought was funny, and then I didn't think all the way through what that meant for some people. Next question, last question.
Okay, coming in from Jason Panks in Nashville, says, anyone have a book or course on public speaking, for example, Toastmasters International?
Go ahead, Jason.
I don't, but I have instead a better idea. Next time you're on the phone at work, remember that you really can just work on conversation and make the other person be your entertainment. If you get better at speaking and at conversing, you will be better at hosting.
Go ahead, Rupert.
Yeah, by all means, take some cues from books or trainings or whatever, but ultimately it's about practice and repetition.
Yeah, go ahead, Guy.
There's a book that I just got 2 days ago that was recommended here. It was an NPR book, and there's a section on hosting, which I went straight to. So I checked the index, and then that was the one I jumped straight to. So it's so far so good. So I'd recommend getting the NPR book. I'll put it in Mukana.
What's the name of it? What's the name of the book?
It just says NPR audio sound reporting, I think is the name of it.
Yeah, I think I have that book. Yeah, it's good. It's a good book. Yeah, the main thing is that to what Jason said, or Rupert said. Somebody said, practice. Practice is the best thing. It's getting used to dancing with a conversation. And I think that we have kind of provided a pretty key place for you to do it. There's a huge playground called After Hours and Office Hours where you can practice interacting with a lot of other folks, practice, doing a lot of things in front of folks, and then keep on stacking that up. If it makes sense for you. And I would highly recommend taking advantage of it. I think that there's going to be a lot of opportunities for different kinds of shows than what we've seen in the past. And I think we're part of that beginning. And I think that the key is to get good at it. And the only way to get good at it is to do it. You can read all the books you want, and that's a good place to start. But really, the books will make more sense after you've done a bunch of it. Like when you do it, you go, oh yeah, and that makes more sense. So anyway, good conversation. Again, another conversation that I wasn't sure. I was like, I'm going to put this up. I don't know how well it's going to work, but worked well. There's a lot of good questions, and so great questions from our producers. Thank you so much for the guide and the conversation forward, and also thanks to our panelists with a lot of great conversation, great answers in the first hour, great answers in the second hour. So we've done it yet again. I don't know. I think we're at 576 or something. I think we have to do something for 600. I think every 100 we have to think about some kind of like little mini celebration that we did another 100 episodes. Anyway, we'll jump into after hours now. Tomorrow we'll talk more about Office Hours 2.0. All right, see you then.